This video is now in session, and last week we saw a major storm come through the Northeast, Storm Ida, or Hurricane Ida, and it made landfall, or I guess it wreaked havoc in the Northeast, in New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Connecticut, the New England area. All of these states have been heavily impacted by Hurricane Ida, and now several dozen people are dead from this tragic occurrence. And we're still seeing the effects of flooding as of Saturday when this video is being recorded. If we go over to the Philadelphia area, the Vine Street Expressway, at this point, if we go into it, only now is it just starting to open back up. We're still seeing a lot of the Vine Street Expressway in Philadelphia still closed. We still see a lot of these riverside roads being closed because of flooding. That's how big the flooding was. It got to the point where a major stretch of an interstate highway, I-76, was completely closed because the Schuylkill River completely flooded it. So we're seeing a destruction of infrastructure and I guess disabled infrastructure because of flooding, because of the effects of large torrential rainfall. So if we look at this graph right here, you can see the amount of rain that has dropped and the amount of inches that it has caused in New York and New Jersey, and you can see right here that over time, this kind of average rainfall, average inches per hour, has increased over the years. You can see that it's mainly been down here in 1965, but now we're starting to see an expansion in 2021 to 1 or 2 inches. And in last week, we saw a record 3.24 inches of rain in Newark, New Jersey. So that has surpassed previous records that were set in 2006 and in 2021, or I guess in the same period of time. And another high occurrence of rain occurred, 1.82 inches between 9 and 10 p.m. of September 1st, 2021. So from this, we can see that a lot of the infrastructure in New York and Philadelphia and these older eastern cities are not up to par. But more importantly, it's becoming a large issue nationally because in the East Coast, we're seeing a lot of rain. In the West Coast, we're seeing a lot of drought. So you have these two extremes of weather occurrences that are happening in both sides of the United States. So what are the solutions to this? I mean, we're seeing wildfires in California, and we're seeing heavy rain in the East Coast. And then meanwhile, we have farmers in Central America who are either inundated by a lot of water or have to face droughts, especially farmers in the Arizona area, especially in the Great Plains area of Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. So to solve this, it takes both massive changes to infrastructure, but it also takes changes to how we approach consumption of energy. When we talk about consumption of energy, right now a lot of our daily life still surrounds itself by fossil fuels. And the thing with fossil fuels is that it's a finite resource. It's a source that emits greenhouse gases. I think that's pretty I think that is uncontested, but we think that it's uncontested. But when it comes to using fossil fuels, it causes more of global warming because carbon dioxide is trapped in the ozone area, and as a result, heat reflects back and forth back to the earth when the sun shoots towards the earth. Then that heat tries to escape the earth after it hits level ground, but because the ozone layer is filled with carbon dioxide, it can't do that. So the heat is just trapped in the earth, or I guess in the skies of the earth. And this isn't really a really good explanation of how climate change works, but there are certainly other videos that are more detailed than what I just said. But ultimately, that creates warmer waters, and with warmer waters you're more likely to have clouds forming, and you're more likely to have storms. You're more likely to have rain if you have higher humidity and higher heat in our major oceans. So hurricanes form, hurricanes like Hurricane Ida, and they form with stronger force. So you see that even though once it pummeled through Louisiana and turned into a regular storm, it inflicted heavy damage on the infrastructure systems in the Northeast before going over to the Atlantic Ocean. And now we're seeing more and more hurricanes happening, or I guess forming between Africa and the Caribbean as well as the United States. And that creates a problem for the bulk of Americans, because we're seeing, or I guess half of America, where we're seeing large amounts of flooding. Meanwhile, the heat in the West has a direct impact because it is drying up major rivers that have been in the West Coast for decades upon decades, including the Colorado River, and as well as most rivers. And there's the argument to be made with the wildfires and the drought happening that it can be solved with forest management and preservation of water sources, but a lot of times those two solutions by themselves won't be able to mitigate the full effects that we're seeing in the West Coast. It won't be able to mitigate the large effects of drought that is causing a lot of trees to die, and it's not going to be able to mitigate the effects of wildfires in California. So as to how to solve this for the flooding that has happened in the Northeast, a lot of people have suggested revamping our infrastructure, but that by itself can't really stop this, because the main problem is that the rain is not coming from the ocean through a hurricane, but rather it's coming directly from the sky. So when you have large amounts of rain coming from the sky, then essentially your city is very prone to flooding. New York is prone to flooding, and Philadelphia is prone to flooding, because it's these old cities that were built on low-level lands that can easily be flooded with just a couple of inches, with a few inches of rain happening per hour. So, and especially in Brooklyn, because Brooklyn, a lot of it is sea level in terms of its land. So it's very highly prone to flooding, especially if you have water building up on these rivers, in addition to these 5 boroughs, then you have major flooding that can happen. So seawalls can't necessarily stop this kind of flooding when you have water coming from the sky rather than from the river. So what's next? Drainage pumps could be a solution, but for drainage pumps, you have to find somewhere to drain the water to. You could put it into a water treatment facility, but that would take massive infrastructure. Or you could do the status quo, which is pump it out back into the ocean. But again, that's a problem, because the rivers, at the same time as the 5 boroughs and as well as in other cities, are being flooded at the same time. So that solution also doesn't work. So there are only really 2 major solutions that could effectively solve this problem. Either you can take the drastic step of moving your city to higher ground, which obviously is not efficient at all, or you have to tackle the reason why large rainfall is happening in New York. The reason why large rainfall has been able to kill dozens of individuals in New Jersey, in major areas like Newark and as well as South New Jersey, and that deals with tackling climate change. And it's something that a lot of Americans just don't want to believe in, but it is happening. Climate change is happening, and there is a reason why a lot of people don't want to believe in it, because a lot of people have fossil fuel jobs. A lot of people have jobs in the energy industry with non-renewable energy sources, and that makes sense as to why they wouldn't want to accept this kind of reality. In addition, climate change, a lot of it is science, and at this current moment, we're seeing a lot of people not trust in science. So it's reasonable to see why people don't want to believe in climate change, but ultimately, there is no risk to spend in money to revamp our infrastructure. There's no risk to spend in money to develop technology, because those kinds of things create jobs, and they also tackle other problems. They tackle economic issues that a lot of people face in the rural areas of the United States. If you replace a lot of fossil fuel jobs in North Dakota and South Dakota with renewable energy jobs, then you're more likely to create sustainable jobs that can last for several decades. In addition, you can also create new R&D facilities that generate more jobs, and that's how America is able to take climate change and not only make solutions from that problem, but also have those solutions solve other issues that we currently face in today's society. So there's no harm in trying to tackle climate change. There is no harm with that, especially if you are able to implement a transition phase in coal states to more renewable energies, like there is in Texas. In Texas, we're seeing an example of fewer fossil fuel jobs and more renewable energy jobs, especially in the western region of Texas and the central region of Texas, where we're seeing wind turbines pop up by the minute. So these kinds of solutions, they're beneficial not only to solving the issue of climate change, but they also are beneficial to everyday Americans. And that's something that both Republicans and Democrats need to take note of, because this issue, climate change, and its effects will affect everyone, not only if you are a Democrat in a coastal city, but also if you are a Republican in Central America, because more of these adverse natural / man-made effects will start to occur, and it will only destroy our infrastructure. It will only increasingly destroy our infrastructure, and eventually we'll have to pay more money just by revitalizing our damaged infrastructure than by being proactive and making sure that these kinds of storms are less frequently occurring. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.